The morning was quiet until 7-year-old Emily heard a strange sound coming from the old barn, a low, rhythmic breathing that didn't belong. Gripping her flashlight, she crept closer, her boots crunching over the frosted grass. When she pushed the door open, her heart nearly stopped. Inside, four massive German shepherds sat perfectly still, their glowing eyes fixed on her. They didn't bark. They didn't move. They just watched, calm, controlled, like soldiers waiting for orders. Emily whispered, "Who are you?" One of them tilted its head, almost human-like, and that's when she saw it. The faint numbers burned into its neck. These weren't strays. They were something else. Something that was never meant to be found. The morning mist still clung to the fields when little Emily skipped toward the old barn. The smell of hay and earth filled the air, and sunlight streamed through cracks in the wooden walls. Everything felt calm until she heard it. A faint rustling sound, followed by a low whine. She froze, her tiny fingers tightening around her flashlight. "Hello," she whispered, taking slow steps toward the barn door. The hinges creaked as she pushed it open. At first, all she saw was darkness. Then her light caught something. Eyes. 4 pairs of glowing eyes staring back at her from the shadows. Her breath hitched. Dogs. Big ones. German shepherds. But they didn't bark, didn't growl. They just watched her. Silent. Perfectly still. That Emily's heart pounded as she looked around. No chains, no leashes, no owner. Their fur was matted with dirt, their paws covered in mud, as if they had traveled for miles. The largest one took a small step forward, lowering its head slightly, almost respectfully. Emily swallowed hard. Something about the way they moved didn't feel like normal strays. These dogs weren't lost. They were waiting for her. Emily slowly backed away, her flashlight trembling in her hand. The barn was silent except for the faint sound of the dogs breathing. She had seen strays before, but never like this. Never this calm. This disciplined. One of them tilted its head as if studying her, while another's ears perked toward every tiny sound outside. They weren't acting wild. They were alert, trained, almost like soldiers on guard. As Emily's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she noticed something strange. Around each of their necks were faint, burn markings, not names, not tags. Numbers. She leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happened to you?" The smallest one whimpered, pressing its body against the floor, revealing a deep scar across its shoulder. Suddenly, the largest dog, the one with intelligent eyes, stood and walked toward the door, glancing back at her as if signaling her to follow. Emily hesitated but took a step closer. The dog stopped, its gaze soft yet commanding. In that moment, a chill ran down her spine. These weren't abandoned pets. Something, or someone, had trained them. And whatever they'd escaped from wasn't ordinary. Emily ran across the field, her boots kicking up cold morning dew as she shouted for her father. Mark was fixing the tractor when she tugged at his sleeve, breathless. "Dad, there are dogs in the barn, big ones. They're different." Mark chuckled at first, thinking she was exaggerating. But when he saw the look on her face, pale, shaken, he grabbed his flashlight and followed her. The moment they stepped inside, the air shifted. The dogs didn't move. Their eyes locked on him with a quiet intensity that made his stomach twist. "Easy," he murmured, lowering his light. The largest dog gave a short, restrained bark, not threatening, but controlled, like it was trained to alert, not attack. That's when Mark noticed the markings. He stepped closer, wiping away dirt from the fur on one's neck. His hand froze. Numbers. Stamped with surgical precision. Not a tattoo, but a burn mark, identical on each dog. He'd seen this before, years ago when he worked near a restricted facility on the outskirts of town. His heart pounded as realization hit him. These weren't strays. They were trained, marked, and abandoned, the kind of dogs that were never supposed to exist outside government walls. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. The image of those numbers burned into his mind. He sat by the window, watching the barn under the pale moonlight, the dog's shadows shifting behind the wooden slats. Something about them didn't add up. They weren't just trained, they were communicating. He'd seen one nudge another toward the door, then 2 took positions by the entrance, like guards on patrol. Unable to shake his unease, Mark grabbed a lantern and headed out quietly. The dogs didn't bark when he entered. They just watched him, calm but alert. The largest one stood, walked to the corner of the barn and began scratching at the hay-covered floor. Mark frowned, brushing aside the straw. His hand struck something cold. Metal. He knelt down, revealing a rusted hatch half buried beneath the barn's foundation. The dog whined softly, looking from the hatch to him as if urging him to open it. With trembling fingers, Mark pulled the latch free. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway leading underground. A rush of cold air hit his face, carrying a faint chemical scent. He looked back at the dogs. They stood in perfect formation, waiting. Something was hidden beneath his barn, and they wanted him to find it. Mark gripped the edge of the hatch, staring into the darkness below. The air that rose from it was stale and metallic, like rust and old machines. He hesitated, but the dogs didn't. One by one, they descended carefully down the narrow steps, moving as if they had done it countless times before. Emily, clutching her father's arm, whispered, "Dad, how do they know the way?" At the bottom, Mark's lantern revealed a hidden underground chamber, filled with old computer screens, cages, and cracked glass panels. Papers littered the floor, stamped with a faded government seal. A thick layer of dust covered everything except one metal crate in the center. Mark brushed it off. The label read, "Project Reclaimer, K9 Phase 4." His pulse quickened. He remembered hearing rumors years ago about an experimental program, one that trained dogs for military intelligence and emotional imprinting. They were designed to recognize fear, lies, and even hidden weapons. But something had gone wrong. They started reacting emotionally, forming bonds, refusing violent orders. The project was shut down. Emily's voice trembled. "Dad, were they hurt here?" Mark nodded slowly. "They weren't just trained, sweetheart. They were tested, used. And when the program failed," he looked around the abandoned lab, his voice breaking. "They were supposed to be destroyed." The biggest dog stepped forward and gently placed its paw on Mark's leg, as if confirming the truth. Emily knelt beside it, tears filling her eyes. "They escaped," she whispered. "They came home." Mark looked at her, then at the dogs, and finally understood. They hadn't wandered there by chance. They'd come seeking the only thing they'd never been given before: kindness. By morning, news had spread through the quiet farming town. Government trucks, local police, and reporters surrounded the field. The once hidden barn was now swarming with flashing lights and stern-faced agents. Emily clung to her father's arm as the lead officer stepped forward. "These dogs are government property," he said coldly. "We'll be taking them." But the dogs didn't move. They formed a half circle around Emily, their bodies tense but calm, as if protecting her. The officer raised his hand, but Mark stepped in front. "They're not property," he said firmly. "They're survivors." The officer hesitated. He'd seen the reports, dogs that defied commands, that acted on emotion, that chose compassion over violence. One glance at Emily and the way those German shepherds watched her, and his tone softened. "Sir," he said quietly, "you don't understand what they are." Mark met his eyes. "No," he said. "I think I finally do." The officer gave a slow nod. "Keep them off the radar. You never saw us." Then he turned and walked away, his team following silently. As the sun rose, the dogs relaxed, their mission finally over. Emily sat in the hay, the largest shepherd laying his head on her lap. "They're not soldiers," she whispered. "They're family." Mark smiled faintly, his voice breaking. "You're right, kiddo. They came home." The camera pans wide, the golden light of dawn flooding the barn as the dogs rest peacefully around the little girl.